Picture a dusky, sun-scorched construction site in South Sudan. You see the iconic blue helmets of the UN peacekeeping mission, but as you get closer, the scene feels off. Instead of rifles and armored patrols, these soldiers are operating heavy excavators and pouring concrete for a local road. They are Japanese self-defense forces, and while the rest of the world calls this peacekeeping, the Japanese government is careful to use a very different, much softer term: the consolidation of peace. It's a peculiar sight that perfectly captures Japan's complex, almost distant relationship with Africa. For decades, Japan has maintained what experts call a psychological distance from the continent, yet it has quietly become one of its most vital economic lifelines. When I look at those soldiers building bridges instead of manning checkpoints, it highlights a fascinating contradiction. Japan is legally restricted from traditional military intervention, so they've bet everything on a singular, provocative idea that you can pave a path to peace through infrastructure and trade data rather than through force. But then you have to ask, what happens when the shooting starts? When an engineering unit is caught in a crossfire, they aren't legally allowed to return. The peace through development strategy faces a brutal reality check. It is a logic that says it's okay for us to build, but not okay for us to fight.
And that tension is really the absolute core of Japan's entire post-war foreign policy, isn't it? This paradox between their constitution, their, deep commitment to pacifism, and yet this real need to be a major player on the global stage.
A major player with essentially one hand tied behind its back.
Exactly. They can't use traditional force, the kinetic options, so they've been forced to get incredibly creative. They've had to pioneer these non-coercive ways to exert influence, especially in places like Africa. And this whole framework, this consolidation of peace, it's not an accident. It's a very deliberate philosophical and tactical choice.
An alternative to the Western model.
A direct alternative to what we usually see, that sort of Western, liberal, universalist model of intervention.
Well, that sets up our deep dive perfectly. We're going to unpack this whole idea of Japan's consolidation of peace, which, the name itself tells you something. It's not about immediate fixes. It sounds more foundational.
It's about the long game.
So to start, let's get into the foundation of it.
Yeah.
What's the diplomatic philosophy that's actually guiding this? Where does this all come from?
Well, it starts right at the heart of their identity, their post-war identity as a peace-loving nation. That's baked into their constitution. But, for a global economic powerhouse, just being peace-loving isn't a foreign policy.
Right. It could look passive.
It can. So they've paired that identity with a formal strategy they call proactive contribution to peace. The name is key. It's about being actively, deeply involved in international stability, but, and this is the critical part, always on a non-military path.
So it's a conscious choice to define their global power by the tools they use, not by staying on the sidelines.
You've hit the nail on the head, and this isn't just a talking point, it's encoded in policy. The 2015 Development Cooperation Charter made it legally binding. It explicitly says Japan will contribute to peace and prosperity through cooperation for, and I'm quoting here, non-military purposes.
And what does that mean in practice? What does it rule out?
It rules out two big things. First, development aid can never be used for overt military goals. No funding weapons, no training soldiers. Second, it can't be used in a way that might aggravate a conflict. You can't say, build a road that only benefits one ethnic group in a contested area. That strict line is absolutely essential for their credibility.
Okay, so if the tool isn't military, what's the goal? What's the philosophical yardstick they're using to measure success?
The yardstick is human security. That is the absolute center of this entire philosophy. It's a huge shift.
From what? National security?
Exactly. It's not about protecting the state's borders. It's about the right of individual people to live happily with dignity and free from two things: fear and want.
Fear and want. So protection and empowerment.
Precisely. Those are the two pillars. Protection from physical threats, yes, but also empowering people and communities to build resilience for themselves. So Japan isn't just showing up to patch a hole in a dam. They're trying to mainstream this idea that the ultimate measure of global stability is the well-being of the individual.
That's a powerful idea.
Yeah.
But when you see them on the ground, their diplomatic style feels very different. It's quieter. Can you talk about this indirect approach they take?
Yes, the indirectness is a defining feature, and it's a direct export from their own culture, from business and politics in Japan. There's a concept called Nimo-washi.
Nimo-washi, what does that mean?
It literally means going around the roots. Before any big decision is formally announced, they do this incredibly meticulous, informal, long-term consensus building. They talk to everyone, smooth over disagreements, get buy-in, all behind the scenes.
So by the time the proposal is public, everyone's already on board.
Or at least their major concerns have been heard and addressed. The risk of a big public failure is dramatically reduced, and you can imagine how valuable that is in a fragile post-conflict country where a public disagreement could be, well, disastrous.
It's like a form of political risk management.
A very sophisticated one. And it carries over into how they deliver aid. Their preferred method is request-based official development assistance, or ODA. They actually wait for the recipient country to ask for help.
That seems risky, though. I mean, Western donors often criticize that as being too passive, right? Aren't they missing opportunities by waiting to be asked?
That is the big trade-off, and it's a totally fair criticism. The response is definitely slower than a more interventionist approach. But from Japan's perspective, that delay is a necessary price to pay for long-term success.
Why? What's the logic there?
The logic is that real sustainable change has to come from within. If the host country isn't genuinely asking for that bridge or that vocational school, if it's an idea imposed from the outside, it won't have the local ownership it needs to survive when the foreign experts leave.
So they're trading speed for sustainability. Immediate impact for, hopefully, permanent self-reliance.
That's the bet they're making.
This patient, hands-off style. It brings to mind this incredible observation I was reading about. It was from an interview with a village elder in South Sudan, and he'd seen international groups come and go for decades.
Okay.
He said the Western missions often arrived with a checklist, demanding these huge, immediate, top-down reforms for democracy and so on, things that often just didn't fit the local context. But he said the Japanese were different. His phrase was they were present without being loud.
Wow. Present without being loud. That's perfect. That is exactly what experts mean when they call Japan's strategy a blueprint for a third way of international relations.
A third way.
It's strategic patience made into policy. It's a fundamental respect for sovereignty. They work with the local authorities to strengthen the structures that are already there and functioning instead of trying to bulldoze them and replace them with some foreign-designed institution that nobody understands.
So instead of demanding immediate political change, they focus on, say, technical capacity, building a better water system, training engineers, the idea being that real peace has to grow at a pace the local society can actually handle.
That is the core of it. They prioritize sovereignty and gradual institutional evolution. They've seen, as we all have, that forcing rapid political change often leads to chaos, to pushback, and makes long-term stability impossible. So they focus on the technical goals, and by doing that, they quietly build the legitimacy of the local state, not by replacing it, but by helping it deliver real results to its people.
Okay, so that's the philosophical framework, sovereignty, gradualism. Let's get into the practical side. How does Japan actually turn this idea of consolidating peace into action on the ground? It seems like it's all about economics and infrastructure.
It absolutely is. The Japanese model sees a stable economy as, well, not just helpful, but as an essential precondition for a stable society. Their belief, based on their own history, is that economic growth is the only sustainable way to eradicate poverty.
But that's a key distinction, isn't it? They're aiming for poverty reduction as a result of growth, not as the immediate goal of aid.
A huge distinction. It's a departure from a lot of aid models that focus on immediate relief or consumption. They're trying to build the economic engine itself, trusting that a rising tide, if you manage it right, really does lift all boats.
And they don't just call it growth. They use a specific term, quality growth. What does the quality part add?
Quality growth is a very strategic concept. It's defined by 3 core features, and each one is designed to make that growth lead directly to stability and conflict prevention.
Okay, what's the first one?
First is inclusiveness. The benefits of growth have to be shared across society. You can't have a model where only the elites get rich, because that inequality is a classic driver of conflict. So you have to deliberately make sure marginalized groups are included.
Makes sense. What's number 2?
Second is sustainability. The growth has to be environmentally sound and viable for future generations. You can't build a peaceful future by destroying your natural resources, especially in Africa, where so many conflicts are already linked to climate change and resource scarcity.
And the third feature?
The third is resilience, and this is maybe the most important one in a place like South Sudan. The economy and the society have to be able to withstand shocks, whether it's a natural disaster, a global price crash, or, crucially, a relapse into political violence.
So inclusiveness, sustainability, and resilience. It's like a conflict prevention strategy disguised as an economic policy.
That's a great way to put it. They're trying to build an economy that is inherently stable and shockproof.
So how do they do it? How do they use their ODA, their aid money, to actually build this kind of economy?
It's used very surgically. OBA, the grants, the technical help, the loans, is seen as a catalyst. The goal is to use that public money to mobilize much larger pools of capital, especially from the private sector.
So they're de-risking the environment for private companies.
Exactly. They often use loan aid for huge infrastructure projects, power plants, ports, major bridges. These projects create the basic conditions that make a country attractive for foreign direct investment. They're building the foundation so that others, including their own companies, feel confident enough to come in and build on top of it.
That focus on foundational infrastructure. It brings us to this story from South Sudan. It's from a logistics coordinator's journal about a local transport businessman in Juba named Nimo-washi.
Yes, the Nimo-washi story. It's a perfect microcosm of the whole philosophy.
For years, his entire business, his life really, was dictated by these broken, unreliable roads. The roads were basically a physical map of the distrust and isolation between different communities.
And that's not just an inconvenience, it's an economic and social disaster. It raises the cost of everything, it keeps communities apart, it breeds suspicion.
So when the Japanese Self-Defense Force engineers showed up to work on projects like the Freedom Bridge over the Nile, they weren't just pouring concrete.
No, they were implementing a philosophy. The philosophy that peace is something tangible. It's something you can walk on, drive on. It's reliability.
I heard they made a point of building permanent structures, sinking these deep concrete pillars, a real contrast to the temporary fixes that often come with aid projects.
That's key. It signals a long-term commitment. And for a guy like Nimo-washi, that bridge was a lifeline. It wasn't just a shortcut. It meant he could safely and reliably move goods and people between neighborhoods that were previously cut off from each other.
So the infrastructure literally builds the social connections.
It fosters social stability from the ground up. It creates market access. It lowers the price of food. And maybe most importantly, it builds trust between communities that now have to share and rely on this common asset. It's what some call a quiet kind of dignity. It's not flashy, but it's about building real, lasting capacity.
It makes so much sense. When infrastructure fails, it creates a vacuum. And that's where non-state actors, militias, criminal gangs, they step in to govern. But if you can rely on a bridge built with state cooperation,
then the state's legitimacy grows. Social cohesion gets stronger. It's a slow, bottom-up process, but it's built on a solid foundation, literally.
Okay, so we've talked about the physical infrastructure. But Japan also exports something else, something less tangible, but maybe even more important, a specific organizational methodology. The Kaizen and Takumi approach. This is basically exporting discipline.
This is one of their most unique contributions, and it comes straight from their own post-war industrial miracle. Kaizen is a word most people have heard. It means improvement change. Kai for the better, Zen. But in management, it means continuous, sustainable improvement through a participatory process.
Right. Everyone thinks of Toyota. Just-in-time manufacturing, hyper-efficient assembly lines.
And that's where it was perfected, for sure. But the genius of it is that it's not really about cars or robots. It's about human organization and eliminating waste. And that philosophy can be applied anywhere. A factory, a hospital, a government office. And crucially, it's a low-cost approach. The investment is in people's mindsets, not in expensive machinery.
So when JICA, Japan's aid agency, brings Kaizen to a country in Africa, what specific tools are they teaching?
Well, Kaizen is really an umbrella with a lot of tools underneath it. We hear about things like total quality management, TQM, which is about ensuring quality at every single step. But a really practical one is the just-in-time system, or JIT.
How does just-in-time, a concept from a high-tech Toyota plant, work in a developing economy where supply chains are maybe not so reliable?
That's a great question. The core principle of JIT is eliminating muda, the Japanese word for waste. It's about only making or getting what you need exactly when you need it. So in an African context, training in JIT helps a local business identify all the things they do that don't add value. Storing too much inventory, which ties up cash, moving materials around the workshop unnecessarily, making too much of a product that doesn't sell. Even with limited resources, you can find massive efficiencies.
And what about Kanban? I always see that word alongside JIT.
So Kanban is the tool that makes JIT possible. It's just a signal, usually a physical card or a light. It's a communication device. When a worker on the assembly line uses up a box of bolts, they send the empty box with its Kanban card back to the storeroom. That card is the signal to send exactly one more box of bolts, no more, no less.
So it's a super simple, low-tech way to manage inventory.
Elegant, isn't it? For a small factory in, say, Ethiopia, it means they don't have to tie up all their money in raw materials they don't need yet. It prevents shortages and stops overproduction. It's a simple visual system for control.
But all of these technical ideas, they seem to rest on an even more basic foundation, right? The 5S principle.
The 5S is the absolute starting point. You can't do any of the other stuff without it. It's basically a philosophy of workplace discipline and good housekeeping, and it starts with 5 Japanese words.
Okay, let's go through them.
First is seri, sort. Go through everything in the workspace and get rid of what's not needed. Second, seiten, straighten, a place for everything and everything in its place. Third is seiso, shine, keep the workplace clean. Fourth, seiketsu, systematize. Create standards for the first 3 S's.
And the 5th one. This one seems like the hardest one to teach. Shitsuke, self-discipline.
That's the one that ties it all together. It's about making the other 4 a habit, internalizing the process so it becomes second nature. And that brings us to this amazing story about the Takumi spirit, the spirit of the master craftsman.
Right, this was at a vocational training center in Ethiopia. Tell us about the young woman, Amara.
So Amara shows up and she's excited. She's expecting to learn, high-tech skills, how to operate some advanced machine. But instead, for weeks, her Japanese instructors drill her on 5S.
I can imagine she was frustrated. Why am I spending a month learning how to sweep the floor and organize a toolbox?
Exactly. But the instructors explained that the point wasn't just to have a clean shop. The point was to export a disciplined, order-oriented developmental model. They taught her that the focus on precision and order instills the Takumi spirit. The idea that the quality of your work is a reflection of your character, and that is a form of social cohesion.
A form of social cohesion. Unpack that a little.
The thinking is that a society functions well, it's stable, because individuals take pride in the order and excellence of their craft. When you create a quality product, reliably, every time, you are building trust with your coworkers, with your customers, with society. It's a profound challenge to the old aid model of just consuming donated goods. This is about creating the mindset to produce quality goods independently.
And there's a huge cultural contrast there, too.
A massive one. In many places, cleaning and organizing is seen as low-status work. You delegate it. In the Japanese model, 5S is everyone's job. The manager, the engineer, the person on the line. Everyone is responsible for the order of the workplace. It builds shared ownership.
So how successful has Jacob been at transferring these ideas outside of a manufacturing setting?
They've had some really interesting successes through adaptation. Look at Tunisia from 2006 to 2008. They focused on specific sectors like food processing, and they introduced 5S and something called quality control circles, where workers themselves identify and solve problems. And they found that it worked best where top management was totally committed.
So the discipline has to come from the top.
It has to. It can't just be a bottom-up thing. But an even better example of adaptation is Brazil.
What happened there?
Jaco worked there in the late 90s, but the local partner, the Brazilian Institute of Quality and Productivity, realized you couldn't just copy-paste the Japanese model. The business culture was different, so they created their own version called systemic productivity.
Systemic.
Meaning it integrated local factors, social norms, cultural attitudes, the specific economic realities of Brazil. They adapted the process without losing the core philosophy of continuous improvement, and that's the key lesson. You have to customize it.
And the most powerful example outside of industry has to be in healthcare.
Oh, absolutely. In Central America, they applied Kaizen principles to hospitals. They brought in a system for staff nurses, doctors, administrators to identify bottlenecks in their workflow.
And what was the result of that?
It was life-changing. In one pediatric unit in a hospital in Honduras, the average wait time for a sick child and their family was 6 to 8 hours.
6 to 8 hours. That's an eternity when your child is sick.
A nightmare. Using these methods, analyzing patient flow, reorganizing how they did things, they cut that waiting time down to 2 hours.
And this wasn't from a big grant for a new building or more staff?
No. This was just by applying the discipline of seri and seiten to their process. Sorting, streamlining, standardizing. It just proves that this mindset works whether you're building a bridge, a car, or fixing a broken healthcare system.
It's clear this whole model gradual change, infrastructure, and this intense focus on human discipline is Japan's core strategy. But now we have to place this very soft power approach against the very hard power reality of modern conflict in Africa.
And that's where the rubber meets the road, because the nature of conflict in Africa has changed dramatically since the Cold War. We're not talking about big state-on-state wars as much anymore.
What are we talking about then?
The data is really clear on this. What has been rising, especially since the 2010s, are low-intensity, long-term conflicts. These are conflicts with, say, between 25 and 1,000 deaths per year. They just simmer and flare up endlessly.
And they're not driven by ideology so much as identity.
Exactly. They're characterized by non-state actors, groups fighting along ethnic, religious, or tribal lines. You see it with the farmer-herder conflicts that have been so devastating. They're often very localized, happening in rural areas where the state is weakest.
But the root causes of those conflicts are the very things Japan's development model is trying to fix, aren't they? Resource scarcity, poverty.
They are completely inseparable. These conflicts are deeply connected to land degradation, to population pressure, and most of all, to the brutal impacts of climate change. When communities lose their livelihoods because their land has turned to dust, it creates the perfect conditions for violence to take root. You can't have peace if people can't feed their families.
So Japan's strategy of building economic stability seems like the right medicine. But what happens when their legal restrictions mean they can't provide direct security?
Well, that's the thing. The non-coercive strategy isn't just a preference, it's a legal necessity for them. Their laws are so strict about the use of military force that this heavy reliance on ODA and development is really the only path they have.
And the JSDF deployment in South Sudan is the ultimate example of this, the engineers working on the UN mission.
It's a completely unique case, because it forces a collaboration between their military, the JSDF engineers, and their civilian aid agency, JC.
How does that work in practice?
The JSDF engineering units are there to, say, repair a critical road. And they often end up using heavy machinery or materials that were provided through a JICA ODA grant. It creates this powerful synergy on the ground.
So you have military logistics and engineering expertise paired with civilian aid funding.
Right. And what's really interesting is that this coordination often happens organically, at the field level. The people on the ground just figure it out because it makes sense, even if the high-level policy isn't perfectly integrated. It's Japan finding a way to contribute meaningfully to peacekeeping while staying strictly within its non-combat mandate.
And this whole philosophy is showcased in their main diplomatic outreach to the continent, right? TICAD, the Tokyo International Conference on African Development.
Yes, TICAD is huge. It started way back in 1993, and from the very beginning, peace and stability have been a central theme, but always framed as the essential prerequisite for development. And a core principle of TICAD is respecting African ownership, supporting African-led initiatives like the African Peace and Security Architecture.
Which fits perfectly with their don't impose philosophy.
It's all part of the same gradualist, supportive approach.
If we pull the lens back a bit and compare Japan to other big Asian players like China and India, you start to see a pattern, a kind of regional consensus on what some call developmental peace.
There is an undeniable convergence. Japan, China, and India all tend to operate from a similar premise, that conflict comes from material deprivation, and the solution is economic development. It's about infrastructure, human resources, and state-led growth.
And that's rooted in their own histories.
Absolutely. They all went through periods of rapid state-led industrialization. They believe in the power of a strong central state to direct economic transformation. And that leads to another shared trait. They are all very state-centric in their foreign policy.
Meaning they prioritize sovereignty and non-interference.
Very much so. The Asian model, broadly speaking, is to strengthen the central government of the partner country, seeing a strong state as the only reliable partner for these massive economic projects.
And how does China's approach specifically fit into this model? Their presence in Africa is enormous.
China's engagement is a primary example of the developmental peace model. Their focus is overwhelmingly on infrastructure and industry. I think the data shows something like 60% of their concessional loans go to infrastructure, and another 16% to industrial development. It's a powerful model of state-led growth, building the physical capacity for economic takeoff.
So on the ground, a big infrastructure project from Japan and one from China might look similar and serve a similar stabilizing function.
They do share that core belief in the primacy of the economic foundation. Where Japan differs is more subtle. While they don't lecture about democracy, their methods implicitly carry democratic values, transparency, participation, but they're very careful with their language.
What do you mean?
On a community project, you won't hear them use a politically loaded word like democracy. They'll talk about the efficiency of the Kaizen process or the technical specs of the concrete. They believe that demonstrating competence and delivering results is a more powerful argument for their values than any political speech.
That brings us back to that idea of strategic patience. They're betting that by respecting sovereignty, by being present without being loud, they avoid the kind of backlash you see when foreign political models are imposed too quickly.
They are playing the long game. They've seen that forcing rapid political change can be incredibly destabilizing. So they work at the technical and societal level first, with a kind of humility that acknowledges they don't have all the answers for another country's complex political evolution.
Okay, so this is a very unique, thought-out philosophy. But it's not without its problems. Japan faces some major internal challenges in actually implementing this strategy, doesn't it?
It does. And the biggest one is a mismatch between what they can do and what the world sometimes expects them to do. They have to balance their non-military style with increasing pressure to contribute more directly to complex peacekeeping missions that, frankly, require military capacity.
The security realities on the ground have changed and their legal framework hasn't caught up.
Exactly. And then there's a problem of policy dilution internally. The term peace building in Japan has become so broad. Because it's all done through development aid, it can mean anything from education and health to agriculture.
So everything is peace building, then nothing is really prioritized as peace building.
You've got it. It makes it hard to focus their efforts and even harder to measure what's actually working to prevent conflict.
And the JSDF engineers, as valuable as they are, operate in a legally tricky space.
Incredibly tricky. Expanding their role or sending them to more dangerous areas would require changing Japanese law, and that is a huge, politically difficult step to take.
So given these challenges, what are the recommendations for Japan to really maximize the impact of this unique approach? How can they refine it?
One of the biggest things is just getting their own house in order. They need to clarify their primary interests in Africa and then create a unified policy around that. Right now, different ministries and agencies can sometimes work at cross purposes. Better synergy is essential.
Which leads to this idea of an all-Japan approach.
Yes. This is about integrating all the pieces, the government agencies, NGOs, and critically the private sector, into one cohesive peace-building effort. The private sector is the largest untapped resource they have.
Why is getting Japanese companies to invest in Africa so central to this peace strategy?
Because that's the ultimate goal of developmental peace. Private companies create sustainable jobs, they build local supply chains, they drive real organic growth that isn't dependent on aid. So for Japan, encouraging their private sector to invest is a core part of their long-term conflict prevention strategy.
Even in places that are currently stable.
Especially in those places. They see it as a way to build resilience against future conflict by strengthening the economic foundation before a crisis hits.
But those places are still seen as risky. How do you convince a private company to invest?
That's where the ODA comes back in. The government uses aid to build the reliable infrastructure, the roads, the power grids, that lowers the risk for private companies. And JICA can offer things like political risk insurance. They're essentially using public funds to pave the way for private investment to follow.
And finally, since their core strength is this human capital development, what should JICA be focusing on?
They need to double down on what they do best, training people. This means more train-the-trainer programs so the knowledge spreads. It means nurturing young local engineers. And it means developing a class of local consultants who can adapt the Kaizen philosophy to their own country's context. The transfer of that mindset of discipline and quality, that is Japan's real competitive advantage.
The journey through Japan's consolidation of peace reveals a deliberate long-term strategy that views a stable society not as a political import, but as an engineering project, built one road, one factory floor, and one committed, disciplined worker at a time.
And by prioritizing those economic foundations, self-reliance, and that gradual institutional evolution over any kind of rapid political reform, Japan really does offer a profound and patient alternative to the traditional models of intervention.
It's a demonstration that the pursuit of quality and discipline can, in fact, be a deeply effective path toward global stability.
And I think that focus on the internal capacity of the people, the Malawaks and the Amaras of the world, is what gives this soft power approach its real durability. It's a true investment in a peaceful future.